Hi, everybody. I'm Erin Callinan, founder of Beneath the Brave. And in this week's Real Talk Wednesday, I have titled it Don't Tell HR. And we're going to explore ways that we can dismantle stigma about mental health at work. So every week, I'm creating a video to talk about topics, subjects, issues that people often avoid discussing or having conversations about when it comes to mental health. Bringing this conversation into the workplace, I know carries a lot of stigma. There's often risk involved. There's concerns. There's nervousness. All of that is valid because there is stigma that surrounds mental health challenges which show up at the workplace. And it may not always be loud or really obvious, but it's prevalent. It's getting better, but it certainly is prevalent where there may be messages within company culture that says talking about mental health makes you weak, makes you potentially unable to be trusted, to be accountable for your work, maybe the belief that you bring drama to your work. And when we talk openly about mental health, if there is stigma that exists or thrives in a workplace, it is absolutely natural to think that those conversations could be a threat to job security. And so in companies where there's this kind of don't tell HR, it creates, I think, a real sense of fear and shame and avoidance for employees in asking for what they need. Because many times there's fear that they don't trust that going to HR, that it'll be kept confidential. That whatever that narrative is, whatever the disclosure, whatever the medical conditions are that are discussed, there's fear that that may not be kept behind closed doors. They may not know who they are obligated to tell. They may fear that if it's disclosed they are struggling with their mental health, it could impact opportunity, promotions, maybe taking on new projects, maybe impacting their reputation or how other people view them or see them or treat them. And so when companies have cultures where there is this do not tell HR or don't talk about your mental health at all, what's really happening is that people aren't necessarily avoiding help, they're avoiding harm. They're afraid to speak up because of consequences. And in some workplaces, those consequences are very real. And so I want to talk about why stigma persists, some of the pros and cons of talking about mental health in terms of disclosing a mental health condition. Okay, how do we weigh those options to determine what's best for us? I want to mention some of the legal protections and then give a few little pointers on if you or someone you know are going to talk about or disclose your mental health at work, what are some ways that you can do that? So stigma typically thrives in companies that have mindsets around things like leaders don't struggle, strong leaders, right? Strong leaders show up and they put on the brave face and they get the job done no matter what it takes, which that's beneficial in a lot of ways. But the message sometimes that is sent to employees is that when leaders do not show vulnerability, they don't ask for help, that doesn't really invite other employees to ask for help, to go to HR, to go to a supervisor and say, hey, I'm struggling, I need support. Whether that's because of personal struggle at home or professional struggle, maybe they are in need of additional training, guidance, supervision. There may be barriers of, regarding why they're having difficulty with their job. And so we want to really shift, if we're coming from a workplace that does not promote vulnerability among leaders, or that has the beliefs that mental health is personal. I hear this one a lot in the work that I do, where companies will say, it doesn't belong at work. Leave your issues, your problems, your whatever at home. Okay, it doesn't belong here. That's garbage. That's not real life. If somebody's living with a physical health condition, we wouldn't expect them to leave their wheelchair at the door when they show up to the office. We bring our full selves, and our mental and physical health are part of that. And so we want communities, companies, we want folks in the working world to see that when you acknowledge mental health in the workplace, it creates beautiful, beautiful things, because there is a lot of cost to pretending things are fine. When people aren't able to ask for accommodations, they're missing significant work. Maybe there's presenteeism, where they show up to work, but they're not really present. There's high utilization rates for insurance companies, FMLA. There is a financial cost that is associated when employees are not well and are not supported in terms of their mental health. This is absolutely an issue that impacts the bottom line. With that said, unfortunately, disclosing sometimes can lead to bias in the workplace, especially if there is that culture that talking vulnerably about real life is not encouraged. It's not safe to do so. I know a lot of folks, if you're working in public safety or you're working in construction, or there's some kind of emotional safety that is a requirement of the job, there's risk that they'll be treated differently, be pulled from the field, maybe be passed over for a potential opportunity. So I want folks to know that it is absolutely okay, and it's wise, I think, to weigh the risk and the pros and cons of disclosing mental health at work. Now, mental health disclosures should be wrapped in confidentiality. If I go to HR and I tell them about my diagnosis with bipolar disorder, they are supposed to keep that medical information private, just as they're required with other types of medical information or personal information. But we know that sometimes people talk, sometimes word spreads, regardless of if it's coming from HR or other employers or employees or colleagues or leaders, whomever. So certainly consider, whatever profession you're in, be mindful of the benefits and potential consequence of disclosure. Because in reality, there have been really unfortunate things that have happened to people because of disclosures, where it's come back to bite them in the ass afterwards, and we want to avoid that. So do know that once it's out there, it's out there. Okay. And that's just the reality. And so it could potentially impact future dynamics within the workplace. So I don't have all the answers for you. I just have some insights coming from working in the professional world in leadership and in executive positions for 20 years, and living with a mental health condition where I've had to disclose at work. And then there's been jobs where I never disclosed. There wasn't a need for accommodations. And in some companies, I felt as though I would be treated differently, that I would lose, credibility, that it would impact my reputation. And so I want to just provide some information, some food for thought, and hopefully you can take away a couple of nuggets that might be useful for you. Whether you live with a mental health condition and are thinking about sharing at work, or you're an employer, or you're in HR, you're in a C-suite role, whatever that may be. I hope there's a couple ideas from this and some thoughts that you can take with you. So let's start with just some legality. If you live with a mental health condition, you do not have to tell HR. Okay? You are not required to disclose a mental health condition in your interview, during your onboarding, during training. You could be at the company for 40 years and you are not legally required to provide that information, unless you are requesting a reasonable accommodation so that you can perform your job, so that you can be successful at work. And accommodations can look like a lot of different things. So for me in the past, an accommodation that's been useful is having a modified work schedule. So there was one time in my life, years ago, but one time specifically that my assigned work schedule, which was 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., was really challenging because I was on new medication. And if you take meds, you know it takes a little while for them to work. And mornings were really, really hard for me. And so to be up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to get to work was challenging when I'd only fallen asleep 2 hours prior to that. And so maybe it's something as simple as just a modified schedule, a shift in hours, potentially having flexibility around deadlines, workload. You know, maybe for a certain amount of time, you'll need support in having certain tasks delegated to other people. Accommodations can also be literally the physical environment. You know, maybe moving your workspace to a quieter part of the office. Maybe it's doing remote or hybrid work, getting additional time off or sick leave. It's so advantageous when companies offer mental health days as a part of time off or sick days, so that we don't have to go to work and pretend we've got the stomach flu, or we're going to the dentist and have to leave at 1 p.m. What if we just say, hey, we need a break, we need a reset. I'm going to take care of me so I can be the best employee. I can be the best person, or I could be the best leader and be successful personally and professionally. I'm not going to the dentist. I'm going to my therapy appointment. There's no shame in that. You know, maybe accommodations are job coaching, additional training. It can even be the way that a supervisor or a boss communicates. So maybe an accommodation is having conversations, having a note taker, or having certain things be communicated via email, so it's documented. Or rather than talking over the phone, it's face-to-face or a Zoom meeting. Those are just some of the many examples. So yes, there can be challenges. Yes, stigma is real. Yes, there can be bias. There can be discrimination even. Even though legally, mental health conditions are protected. But there is so much hope. There are so many good things that can come out of a disclosure. Okay, telling another person or HR or your workplace that you live with a mental health condition, that it's not a bad word. It's not an ugly, gross, horrific, embarrassing thing. When you open up or you disclose or you talk about your mental health, some of the pros include accommodations. Your company cannot provide you accommodations if they aren't aware that you have a need for them. And so maybe you don't need to do a full formal request for accommodations, right? Just casually with a supervisor or a colleague, you can get extra time to complete a project or have a reduced workload, longer breaks, whatever that may be. But if you need an accommodation, I'm going to say we here, we can't expect an employer to offer that accommodation if they aren't aware there's a medical condition impairing the ability to do our job well. Okay? So when you open up, you can ask for accommodations. And everybody deserves accommodations. It also can really, really help reduce stigma. Because other employees, other people and colleagues may see your disclosure or your openness just by saying, hey, you know, I got to leave the office early today. I've got a 2 p.m. appointment with my therapist. So I'll be back in tomorrow. I'll see y'all then. That kind of throws out this line. We're like casting a line into the office pool that says, hey, it's okay. There's no shame in talking about how I'm managing my mental health. how I'm practicing that self-care. And so it can help create dialogue. It can open the door for honest conversation among a team or with a leader about the realities that we all face, right? The realities of stress and overwhelm and sometimes burnout, and right? We're all in this together. There's also a huge sense of relief when you don't have to hold the secret anymore. You don't have to hide. And at least for me, I remember living in this sense of fear that if I made a mistake or an error in my work, would they suspect that there was something wrong? Because I knew I had this secret, but they didn't know. And so I was worried that if there was a mistake, is it because I live with a mental illness and it's this horrific thing? Or is it because I'm human and employees make mistakes, right? And so I had this fear that I didn't want anybody to know in case I messed up, they couldn't blame or judge me because I also had a mental health condition. And so when we're open about it in a supportive and safe work environment, we don't have to hide. And it also helps just improve understanding. It provides some more information about maybe why we're struggling. It's not that we don't care about our job. It's not that we're no longer passionate or qualified, or we got other stuff going on. And utilize employee assistance programs. That's one thing so many people overlook, is the value of EAP programs. So if you do not know if you have an EAP program at your company, find out. There are often free mental health services and counseling that are included. So do your work, find out, and make sure that everybody in your company is aware of that. So I mentioned that you don't have to disclose, okay? Mental health is legally protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act, okay? It covers substance use disorders, it covers mental illnesses. But in order to receive accommodations, there does need to be documentation that whatever your experience is substantially limiting some major, activity or area of your life and how it's showing up at work. Thinking, concentrating, your ability to sleep, be productive, whatever your role is. So you cannot be fired for having a mental illness. Does that happen? Yes, but it's not supposed to happen. But if there needs to be an accommodation, employers have the right, and they will request some form of documentation that there is a need for an accommodation, some kind of medical reason. But it doesn't have to be the diagnosis, doesn't have to be the whole resume of the mental health challenge, okay? It doesn't need to have the label on it, other than there's a medical condition that is impacting my ability to do my job well. So employers are required to provide reasonable accommodations, okay? So if my anxiety increases at work over, let's say, the holidays, okay? I cannot request that my employer put up a wall in the middle of the office so I can have a private space to manage my anxiety, okay? That would cause an undue hardship. So it has to be a reasonable accommodation that wouldn't create a significant financial hardship, right? Find out about family and medical leave. Many times people can take up to 8 or even 12 weeks of leave for themselves, or even potentially taking care of another person who's struggling with a mental health condition. So if you're looking to disclose, or, somebody in your life is, it doesn't have to be this big, intense, formal sit-down meeting with HR. Let me tell you, the majority of HR leaders that I have worked with in the last 5, 6, 7 years, They want so dearly to offer help and support their teams to be well. And so my hope is that we can kind of eradicate this fear that HR is there to, to punish and to fire and to get people in trouble. They're there to offer support in a lot of different ways. And so there has been a lot of really good training and services and things that have been provided to HR folks for years and years, but I think especially post-COVID, to really ensure that they have what they need and the skill sets to support folks with mental health conditions. So if you're going to disclose, you only need to disclose the medical condition, some kind of documentation that there is a medical condition, doesn't matter what it is, that is requiring an adjustment or a change of some kind at your workplace. This can literally be a conversation. HR will document it, but it's not as though you need to go fill out this 6-page report, okay? Employers are required to keep whatever information is shared or medical records or a letter from a provider or a doctor, to keep it confidential and separate from general personnel files. Now, if you're wondering about confidentiality, what are the pros? What are the cons? What are types of workplace accommodations? Today's Real Talk Wednesday is just the tip of the iceberg. So I want to recommend that you reach out to Jan. This is not a person. This is a company. And Jan is the Job Accommodation Network, and they have tons of great resources. So first off, they offer free consultations. So if you're wondering, either as an employer and a leader, or an employee requesting accommodations, or a leader, requesting accommodations, Jan offers a free confidential phone line. They can give you guidance on types of accommodations, as well as answer any questions you may have about like disability employment questions. So if you're wondering about the process of disclosure, they're a great resource. So please remember that you don't have to share your full mental health story unless you choose to. You deserve to have the tools to do your job effectively. You also have to be accountable for getting what you need to do your job well. All right? Despite my mental illness, I'm still required to do my job. And so if there's a period of time, maybe, somebody takes time off or does remote work, or, there's a leave of absence, at the end of the day, there's a time where we also have to ensure we're able to fulfill our obligations. So please do some additional work and continue this conversation so that you really feel confident in knowing what your rights are, what the potential risks, but also the rewards of asking for what you need in the workplace. And so my hope is that we can continue to build workplaces that promote open communication about mental health, right? How can we foster these environments where every team member feels comfortable discussing mental health, in the good and in the yuck? Because we all have mental health. And that there are cultures within that company that people do not have to have fear to show up as human. They see leaders sharing their experience and leading with vulnerability. They're bringing in mental health training. They're ensuring employees know about employee assistance programs. They're offering those mental health days. They're honoring mental health awareness days. Those are great examples of how to bring conversations about mental health and wellness to the workplace. So if you want to learn more, I strongly suggest you reach out to the Jan folks. They are national. They do great, great work around supporting people trying to best advocate for themselves with job accommodations. Join me next week for another Real Talk Wednesday.